Welcome to Scramble Game Show. As usual, this hour we are dividing into two halves. The first half will have an interview, and now we are coming to almost the heat of election time. Next week is the last week before the vote. So we have one more session to interview a political, I wouldn't call politician, a political person running for the supervisor for town of Somers. And his name is Richard Clinchy. I will introduce to our audience because we think everybody in this town should certainly know who is interested in running our town affairs. And the more you know, and the better for everybody, because a government service is a very collaborative business. Now, let me welcome Richard.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
for
much.
coming to us. And
Pleasure to be with you.
As I explained to you, we are a game show. We mainly want to entertain kids and keep them sort of use their brain, right, and build up a very good learning habit. As part of the learning, I always feel that in a community, the public affairs should be part of the learning.
I agree with you.
And as a teacher, you're a social study teacher, right?
Government, law, and economics.
Oh yeah, certainly you would agree. This is a very valuable, experience for our children.
Absolutely. That's why I bring you a little present for all of your players
thank
here.
you for this. Yes.
The Constitution of the United States. So my little idiosyncrasies,
Yes.
giving out pocket constitutions.
Now I'm gonna keep a couple of copies.
You please.
Next half hour when we play the game, and the winner gets a copy. Right? All right.
We have
Okay.
enough for everybody.
Let's get back to our purpose. Having you here.
Right.
I always ask some standard questions, and you feel free to address them. And keep in mind that we like to inform our families and children.
Of course.
Now, tell me why you want to run for this supervisor position.
Well, obviously, I've had a whole life basically of public service between teaching, as you know, on the school board in Somers for 12 years. And I believe in public service. And I believe in elections, and I believe in choices. And I think that I have something to offer that to Somers. And it is perhaps a somewhat different direction, a new look, whatever you would want to call it. And I would like the opportunity to pursue some of those new ideas for a town that I've lived in since 1983 and a town that I've served since 1994. And 2 years ago, when I ran for the town board, I basically ran on 3 issues. One was, as I'm sure you might remember, there was some rancor and some disagreement on the board, and along with obviously other people, I thought it would be good to end that. And I promised to bring some civility and to behave in a way that I think all public officials should, which is regardless of your party. And we have way too much partisanship, I think anyone would say, if you look at Washington, Albany, or on the local level.
Yeah, I remember you sort of saying that you are able to reach across the aisle, so to speak.
Well, I think that that's what anybody would want to do in public service. I think that's what they should do. And that was one of my goals, and another was to put a spotlight onto the environment. Another was to bring new ideas and innovative ideas and some new thinking. I think that's always good, whether you favor an amendment to the Constitution, let's say, on term limits or not. I think it's good to have turnover. So that's why I was doing it. And I do believe in nonpartisanship. I think especially on the local level. To quote, paraphrase Jefferson, 1800s, we're all Republicans, we're all Democrats. And I think on a local level especially,
Yes.
that's it. I think the purpose of government is to solve problems today and to try to prevent problems in the future, and future planning and setting things in place to offset problems that may occur in the future, I think is a responsibility of public officials. But the problem becomes when you run for election continually whether it be for Congress, you can point to examples, or in county, local. After a while, I think that the political process, there's a certain amount of, it attracts you to, your purpose of serving is to become reelected. And sometimes you can lose sight of those larger issues. I certainly respect any public servant who's spent a long time, and it's a tough job.
Yes.
And if it is your career, your career is on the verge any time. So you could lose it, and so that's why sometimes I think I feel for people in those situations.
Right, I agree with you that sometimes continuity can be, of course, a good thing. That
yes, it can.
It brings experience,
Absolutely.
and particularly for complex issues and problems that sometimes you cannot solve in one term.
No, you can't.
There are many long-term issues.
Sure.
So there is a good thing about having a stable office with people serving for a reasonable long time. That's why in Congress sometimes people actually spend a lifetime in Congress.
Yes, they do.
And so on. But on the other hand, I agree also that changes are necessary sometimes, particularly when economic situation and environmental situation that dictates a certain change. When you have a entrenched sort of organization, it doesn't bring the change fast enough, or may not be able to bring change. So certainly there's two side of views.
It is a delicate balance.
Delicate balance.
If you look at California a few years ago, they had an election 6 months later, had a recall of the governor, if you remember. And they didn't have one term, didn't even have a quarter of a term.
Right.
That may be going too far. So as you point out, there's experience, and then there's a desire for fresh ideas, new direction, and I think that's probably the balance of all politics.
Now we, of course, in this recent years, this word change has been used a lot in every level of a election. But as you say, in local communities, we are really not so much driven by ideology and the party,
I don't think so.
slogans.
Right.
More is down to earth issues. Now, to deal with these issues, I don't know whether necessarily we have to use that big word change or transformation or revolution.
I don't think on local politics.
Yeah, it certainly is problems that we all should understand, and how to come to a compromise in solving problems. Now, to that score, what do you see that say in town of Somers? What are the burning issues?
Well, obviously, no matter what level of government you are, the economy is a burning issue. No one would dispute that. Everybody would agree. How are you going to get through the next several years providing town services, which on a downturn, there is that irony of the economy. As the tax revenues go down, the demand for government services go up, whether it be in parks and recreation programs, summer programs, libraries.
Except we can't print money. Local government cannot print money. So,
no, you can't do that. And you have to balance your budget. So the demands are going up and your revenues are going down. Mortgage tax revenues are a large part of any town's budget. It is not only based upon property taxes, sales taxes that you get from percentage of sales in the county. And so your revenues go down, your demand for services goes up. And that is difficult on every single public official. And when you have the governor saying last week, as he's asking, as you well know,
prepare to cut.
Prepare to cut, and even school districts in the middle of the school district, you are going to have some difficult choices there in your position, and every district will. And when asked for what word would he use to characterize the situation, remember he said pain. That is not something that people want to hear. So of course, economic issues are number one. I think also that there is, particularly in Somers, a desire for preservation of the environment, preservation of open space, trying to do the right thing. I do think, I feel very strongly, that government at every time should put into place long-term plans. Because if not, how many times do we look back and say, why back then weren't they smarter? Why didn't they build this then when it was cheaper? Why didn't they buy that land then when you could have gotten it? It's sort of like, why didn't I buy Apple stock in 1990 or something like that? So, those I think are key issues. Is obviously looking for efficiencies in local government. Can you get more for less, so that you relieve tax burdens as much as possible on taxpayers?
Yeah,
Nobody wants to pay more.
Are there things that you could sort of point to that you could get more for less?
Well, I think that there's a couple of things that you could do in the short run. For example, overtime is a big issue for every town. And I think that if you can look to staggering hours to prevent overtime, I think that you need to be able to do that so that there's more of an overlap. And I do think that government services should be offered to people in more convenient times. I don't think you can fit a town government now into 8:30 to 4:30. People's lives don't fit into that anymore. And I think you do have an obligation to expand those services, but at the same time, you have to keep things efficient so that people don't want to pay more to have that service. So can you get more for less? Obviously, technology in any business. Technology in any business is one of the keys to more productivity and efficiency. And if you can use updated computer services, online signups, to either take labor from one department and apply it to another, or you say, we don't need as many people. And if there can be, there's always the talk going around Albany of a retirement incentive or something like that to reduce payroll. I'd certainly be in favor of that. At the same time, you can't just...
But you are not suggesting that the technology replacing people...
Well, it can't, obviously. It's a labor-intensive, just like education, town government.
No, I'm talking about in a sense, this is, of course, some people are very concerned about is whether there will be layoff and
sure.
personnel cut
Of course.
and so on.
No, I think that you have to offer incentives so you have a long-term plan. To go in and simply say, as soon as I come in, we're going to cut this. One, people who say that I think probably haven't studied the situation clearly, anyone who says that. And the second thing, I think that probably just isn't right. You need more time. But I do believe that in offering incentives for win-win type situations, for people who may be on the verge of retirement, maybe we can offer them incentive. They gain that, the town loses payroll. Another thing would be health costs. You don't have to be any advanced degree in economics to know health costs are a huge drain on any business today, and obviously it's dominating the talk in Washington. Can you find ways, again, that are win-win situations by offering people incentives, let's say, to not take it? Two people are wage earners, both have health care. Well, if you go with one and not take the other, can you provide an incentive to that person to not? The town saves money, and if you can return part of those savings to the person who turns down.
These fine ideas, but are they more individual type of dealings that as any business running into a management issue? But from a government service, from a position, say a supervisor, wouldn't we have to look at this more as a broader term rather than this tweaking individually, because that suddenly change. I mean, you did once, the next year it'll be a different situation, right? I think, as you point out, the so-called long-term planning means you really have to look at a much broader picture and look at long-term, and the process leading to that is bringing efficiency in, right? And saving money,
right.
Sort of across the board. That is where I think, may not show in 6 months, but at least will show in time the government is efficient.
Well, that certainly is one thing that I believe that government needs to do. It's not something, as you say, that people are going to see that year on their tax bill, and the effects of it may not be obviously apparent, but over the course of time it does. For example, if you're going to have your buildings in town, you need to make sure that you provide for the proper care of those buildings by putting money away so that when something happens, you don't have a huge bill that comes in. If you're going to plan capital improvements in a town like Somers, where you're not going to go and build a community center or a town pool now in these times, but you may start setting aside monies, if there are monies at the end of the fiscal year, setting them aside for specific purposes. You also have a couple of things coming up. As you well know, the state of New York, the retirement system, which is on a 2-year lag. So ironically this year, as things got worse, the contribution of local governments into that system went down, ironically, because based on returns primarily in the stock market from 2007. Well, we're going to, 2008, 2009 have been so good. Yours and my retirement funds have certainly shown that, I'm sure. You better put some money away so that in a year and 2 years, you're not going to see that huge bulge in that. I believe in keeping things as stable and low as possible. I don't like tax spikes. If that means putting off things for a while in order to keep it stable, that's good. If that means funding now for purchases later on, just like the local homeowner would do, I think that that's good. Another area that I think in the long term you can save money is on the leasing of vehicles. Now, it may not sound like a lot, but when you take into account police vehicles along with town vehicles for the different departments, if you get into leasing more energy-saving vehicles rather than the purchase of them and the repair of them and the maintenance of them, I think you can save money and you can stabilize that over the course of time. Our town.
So this you're saying that the vehicles in town right now are all purchased vehicles?
They are all purchased, yes.
So why isn't the town, the council, taken up that kind of issue before? I mean, this seemed to be pretty obvious economics if you see leasing pays off better than putting a lot capital in, right? Particularly nowadays, interest rates low and so on, so right? So, as a councilman, what sort of things that did you have?
Oh, we discussed that last November. In fact, I've had discussions as probably a month ago with the police chief on that, and he buys in that. In fact, has done research on that in order to bring us back some prices. So I would expect that's something that we will be able to do.
So is it sort of like a study shown that by leasing vehicles that the maintenance costs go down?
Well, if you can have a system whereby you have, and this is what I mean by stability in a fiscal plan, from my way of thinking, is that if you have a routine turnover of that, you can lower your monthly costs and reduce. We pay a lot of money in the repair of police vehicles and other town vehicles. If you can reduce that by having a turnover of it, I think that's in the long term keeping you more stable, and that's what I think is important in long-term financial planning.
This is interesting because I'm sure business.
Now that's one small example.
The business always do that, but I thought when business do leasing versus purchasing capital, usually they want to preserve capital. Right. And second reason is because they have a tax advantage when they are a for-profit operation, and they have tax deduction and so on. Right. But as a government, first we don't have any tax deductible issue there, and we don't also have capital in the sense that stay in the bank,
and reinvest in things.
So is it really feasible to sort of do this kind of a leasing plan type of replacing a whole fleet of cars that are, maybe right now they are still functional and.
Yes, some barely, but yes. Well, I think it is because you say, all right, if you're a business, if you speak as an economist, you preserve capital over here by leasing, so you can invest it in new capital formation over there. It might be new factories, new workers, new worker training. Well, a town could do the same thing. The town is capital expenditure. You expend it in terms of your buildings. That's a capital expenditure. Repair of them is a capital expenditure. If you can take from this area and apply to that area, that really is a capital investment also. The return on it may not be done in annual rates of return, and let's say that a corporation would do, but you do have a rate of return in the sense of what the value of your community would be. It makes it more attractive. It keeps home values up. It keeps your tax rates more stable. If you can invest that money that you save here into quality of life issues, that certainly is a capital expense and a capital investment for which you do to get a return on your money. And again, it may not show on a profit line, but it does in terms of quality of life line. So I think that there are ways that you can make it. It's not exactly similar, but I think the principles are the same there.
Okay, let's get to your second point. You mentioned about the environment. You know, certainly Somers is a beautiful town. Everybody,
Very beautiful town.
you know,
Very
enjoys living here.
Yeah.
As you know, recently the county government sort of made a big screwed up with this lawsuit with the federal court ruling that penalized the county, but that's on the county level. Let's leave that. But as far as the Somers is concerned, I mean, Somers certainly is being included into this ruling as a possibility location for, say, introducing so-called affordable housing.
Workforce
project,
housing.
Workforce housing. Yeah. Now, what's your view? What's your take on that? What, as they say, if you are elected as town supervisor, what are you going to deal with this?
Yeah, obviously it's a controversial issue, and I think it is misunderstood sometimes. There are those who say affordable housing is low-income government housing, but it's not. The rationale behind it is that affordable housing is housing that's available to people who make 80% of the median income in an area like Westchester. That turns out for a family of 4 to be an income of $84,000. It was ironic. I was at Reese Park in Somers, and a fellow was pretty upset about it. He said, I want to talk to you about this county thing, like you're saying. And so it was obvious that he didn't quite understand. I said, well, let me just tell you that a family of 4 with $84,000 would qualify for this housing. And he goes, dang, that I would be in it. And he said, I think now I'm going to change my mind. The reason for it economically, originally, and the rationale for it, before it got all this other stuff in the courts now and the controversy that have surrounded recently, is for economic reasons. And that is, and the reason why some people call it workforce housing, is because the idea is to provide certain types of occupations that typically will fit into that income level is good for the economy of Westchester. Because if those people who have those types of occupations, which might be young professionals, it could be teachers, firemen, police, those types of things, people who provide a lot of trades, who are not poor, but it's hard for them to afford living in this area. To provide that affordable housing for them is good for the economy. It provides those services. It has nothing, the original intent of it had nothing to do with what's been wound up recently.
But when you say affordable living and so on, county is expensive, we pretty much have similar, inflation is not that locally varied in the United States that much. What it makes expensive usually is because taxes. Okay, Westchester has high tax, and the county is probably the highest taxed county in the United States. So don't you think sometimes the so-called economical problem or solution really it should be looked at, okay, from the government aspect? It's why is that these professionals cannot make a living and live in this town? What's the reason? If you say we have local inflation, that a hamburger in McDonald's in Yorktown, it costs 3 times as much as hamburger, in Dallas. Then that's a different story. But I think most people living in this town realize we can't afford to live in Westchester is because taxes. So what do you think, as being, say, you are in the councilman, and if you become a supervisor, how are you going to help the situation in Somers?
Well, needless to say, the supply and demand of housing in Westchester, the prices have gone up so high because the demand for that housing outstrips the supply, and prices skyrocket, especially when money was very cheap and people, as the prices went up in the 600s,
And also property tax.
700,000.
Property
And
tax also
taxes-
propping
and property taxes go
value of-
along with
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And of course, the vast majority of taxes, as everyone knows, comes from school taxes. And towns are a small percentage of the overall tax rate that people pay. And you know, this on a town board, you don't have impact on schools, but you and I know a lot about school financing and school spending. And people pay those taxes because they want a particular education. They want a particular level of education. If a school district is not desirable, the value of land in that area goes down. The question is, what can be done to make that at least as fair as possible and perhaps even eliminate it? There are a couple of things I can do, or a couple of things that can be done. Although a town board, as you know, has no impact really on schools, I think that the more that you can integrate services with schools and look for efficiencies, whether it be in field maintenance, whether it be in technology, whether it be in maintenance, things like that, where you're sharing, especially a town like Somers, where the taxpayers are almost exactly the same between school district and town. It provides Somers, I think, with an opportunity. But it still doesn't solve the problem. I think the problem is, and I've always thought this, is that the problem is, on a state level, that property taxes are an anachronism, in the sense that it is a system designed in the 1800s to pay for schools when wealth is measured by property, the amount of property that you have. And I don't think that's how you measure wealth in the 21st century. As a result, it seems to fall in a disparate way, where two people side by side seem to pay different in school taxes. An older person who retires but lives in the same house, except for the STAR program, their taxes don't necessarily go down. I saw my own dad in Yonkers when he retired after my mom passed away. He had a hard time keeping up. He'd been in the same house for 50 years. I do think that a state like Michigan has had something that's pretty, I think, creative. This is not a solution we can have in Somers, but it's a solution we can push for from Somers, is looking at revamping of the state system. And even if you take a look at the STAR program, one of the problems with that is that originally when it came in, there was no mechanism for funding it. So a person looking at that then could see it would be on some shaky ground. They've cut some of that.
No, basically,
back this
it's
year.
shifting. I mean, all those measures are basically shifting money from here to there. This is definitely no funding. Well, I think the key issue with government nowadays, of course, is revenue side you have a problem, and expenditure side you have a problem. So it seems to me the magic word has to be efficiency somewhere. Right?
Obviously.
That efficiency is the word. So wherever you run into, you have to look for efficiency.
There's no doubt. I think anyone, if you ran a business and you were in competition, you'd look for how can I get more from less.
Yeah.
But like I said, the irony is that if you had a business and time is down, the demand for what you're selling goes down also. With what schools do, what governments do, when the economy's down, the demand for your services is up, but the ability to people pay for those declines. And that is the difficult part of government, of course. So you need to, although government does, this is what gets people upset, you're right. This is what gets people upset, because government has a monopoly in effect on on the things that it does. And it does things that the private sector, private industry is not able to do. But it has a monopoly, and so sometimes it seems like there's a complacency.
Tax become the only solution. Well,
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt at this point, because 30 minutes goes fast, and
Already?
when you discuss, yes.
Oh, my.
So I would like to at least give you 1 minute to speak directly to the audience and the family, children listening, okay, and tell you why you run for this office, or whatever statement you like to make. Come on.
All right, good. Well, I do run for this office, and I would appreciate the support of people, because I do think that a new look is a good look. And if you look at the campaign that we've run, I think people look to government to provide, services and provide ideas. And we have run a campaign which every week has focused in on a new idea. And that is what this, more ideas, less politics. That, I think, is good for any level of government. Less partisanship, more ideas, more creativity. I think that's what leads to improvement. Quality of life, I would like to see in the middle of Somers, sidewalks and crosswalks. You have more crosswalks in the park than you have in the middle of town. It's one of the things that I think we can do that's better for families and better for pedestrians.
Good.
All right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
well,
you.
You know, when you have a heated discussion or a passionate discussion, time flies.
Time does fly.
And I now have to say goodbye to my audience, and at least for this half an hour, we had Mr. Richard Clinchy here. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and certainly he welcomed you to ask any question directly. I'm sure he has a website somewhere.
RichardClinchy.com.
RichardClinchy.com. Okay, here you go. So now the following, stay tuned with us. We'll play the Scramble word game. Thank you for watching.
Very good.